and welcome to another episode of Back to the Burgh, presented by the Pod Hub Network. Today's Small Business Spotlight focuses on PVS Baseball. PVS is Pittsburgh's first data-driven baseball development facility, and it was founded by my guest today. He's a Central Catholic Viking, as well as a Duquesne alum, who is guiding an army of minor leaguers, NCAA players, and whippeal throwers to be the best in baseball. Please welcome Matt Pilewski. Matt, what's up, man?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. Yeah, I came across your facility and your Twitter because I interviewed a bunch of your guys and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
So I reached out to your social media guy and I was like, hey, get me in contact with whoever is the mastermind behind this.
Yeah. I saw those and they were very well done. Some of the guys that you interviewed, they're really hard workers. Indie ball's becoming more important in pro baseball, and highlighting these young athletes, I think is just a great thing. Their stories are really, really special to me as a guy that sees how hard they work. It's something that's never guaranteed. So I really like when some of these guys and kind of broadcast, what they're trying to do in baseball. So I appreciate what you were doing. I think that was great.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, that's what I'm trying to do over here is just highlight the talent that we have coming out of Western PA and just give these people a spotlight because they deserve it. But yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but I interviewed Joey Campagna twice. He's like my favorite guy now. We had a little debate about Hanks and Brewsters on our first episode, and we didn't agree on that, but I think we can both agree that he is a phenomenal baseball player, and that's the type of guys that I feel like he deserves the spotlight. Hey, he didn't make it to the MLB yet, but I think he's on his way. I mean, look what he's doing with the Wild Things this year.
Yeah, he's a special player, special kid. A wealth of knowledge about hitting. He sees things that most guys can't see.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's get into you.
But
I'm sorry. You're cutting in and out. I can't tell when you're done and when you're not. It's all right.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So just Joey. He sees a lot of things that would be considered old school, like the ball coming out of the pitcher's hand. It makes him a very tough hitter to get out. And I root for Joey. I think he is one of my favorite players too. So if I had the chance, if my job were interviewing people, I'd want to interview him as much as possible too. So.
Yeah, he's just got that attitude. He's like, he wants to talk to you. He's awesome. But no, let's get into you now. Let's talk about you and where you came from. So you went to Central Catholic for high school. You told me when you graduated, and I would have never guessed that. I'm not going to date you. I'll let you date yourself. But let's talk about your high school days. Were you a baseball player back in the day?
Yeah, not of any consequence. I played ball for Central. Hit after a while, and for reasons why some people could hit and some couldn't, and I wasn't one of them who kind of study the game. I grew up in the Brookline neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Played football. But I loved baseball, and I learned a lot from the other sports, and baseball was one of those things that I did growing up that I really enjoyed. I was successful at it. I had a semester and a half of catching for Duquesne, basically catching bullpens, and was pretty much told that I wasn't good enough to stick around, and so that was it. And I didn't really get back into the game until I became a dad.
Yeah, that's awesome. You said you got back into baseball because of your son. Talk to me about that. Was it just, obviously it's kind of turned into this, reading the Bocek article and kind of get more of the story, but I'd like for you to tell that story for us.
Yeah, boy, I don't really know where to begin other than to say that I was a dad looking for a way to help my kid play a little bit better than I did, and as I got into this, I found out that there were other guys like me. And, when I lived in Washington, D.C. for a little while, and I had a second job, which most people do down there because the rent's ridiculous. But Yeah. So, you know, one of the guys that I met was an attorney down there, and he coached Little League in Alexandria, Virginia, right across the river from DC where I live. And he asked me if I wanted to coach, and I had a young son at home, and I was like, I played baseball, but I have no idea how to coach it. So why don't I just learn off of these kids, and maybe I'll help my kid a little bit better than I would have if I didn't do that. So that's kind of how it started. And so after that, it kind of turned into a really rewarding experience, and I guess you could say I was kind of good at it. I didn't really expect that. And so the high school coach asked me he saw what I was doing with the younger kids, and he asked me to come out and help the team there. And I said, okay. And so I started working with some of those kids, and that was a little different. You're working with young kids versus high school kids. That was different. But I learned a lot, and I enjoyed it. I moved back to Pittsburgh, and I want to say 07 or 08, right around the time my son was about, like that kid pitch age. And he did that, and I coached his team, and I started to coach more and more, in the communities, rec ball. And then I took my son to a clinic in Bethel Park, where we live now. And he was hitting, and I was approached by the then head coach at Bethel Park High School. And he offered me a job pretty much on the spot, teaching hitting. And I was kind of blown away. And I said, okay, sure, I'll do it. And right after that, I guess the biggest moment, the seminal moment for PVS was an injury that my son suffered. He suffered some Latin phrase that I can't even pronounce or really remember, but it was OCB elbow. Essentially, his arm snapped off because he threw a ball. And like any dad, did he play too much? Did I do this to him? So I started to look into every resource available about all things overhead athlete. And of course, most of that's baseball. And I started to learn that everything that I thought I knew about the game was 100% wrong.
Yeah.
And that there was a lot out there that was not mainstream yet. And back then, we're talking like 2012, 2011, there were bulletin boards. It was kind of before Twitter. And there were guys on there that I tease to this day didn't have very many Twitter followers. They were just regular guys trying to make a living. One of them was Kyle Bodie, who started Driveline Baseball. And another guy who was a dad looking to help his kid was Randy Sullivan of the Florida Baseball Ranch, now the Florida Baseball Armory. And Eric Cressy and other guys like that. Eric Cressy is probably the most well-known performance trainer in baseball now. The facilities in Massachusetts and Florida. But back then, he was just a guy with one gym, and he was very generous with his time, as was Kyle. I talked about my son's injury to those guys, and what may have caused it. And essentially, I just stayed after it. I became very curious about things in a way that I never was as a younger man. I say it all the time. Like I would be up late reading and looking into the mechanics of how we throw and how we move in a way that I never did as a college or high school student. So all that put together led me to, I guess, become willing to try new things. Because if you believe your whole life that you're supposed to get your foot down early and to swing, or you're supposed to finish when you pitch in a fielding position, as I was and as many kids were, I was taught to push off the rubber. I was taught all kinds of things that were just absolutely not what elite baseball players do. And if you're willing to kind of open up to that, then I think you go a little bit further as to what else you're willing to learn about the game and how the body moves to make some of these elite athletes capable of doing what they're doing. And so right after that injury, after my son healed and went through rehab, he of course immediately wanted to go right back into travel ball. And the answer was no. We're going to work on the body, and we're going to make you a rotationally powerful athlete, and then we'll see what happens. And it was the route that we took that ultimately led to him, securing a spot to play baseball at the University of Pittsburgh in the ACC, which back then was something that was so out of the. It was just crazy to think back then that would even be possible. But for that injury, which back at the time we thought was the worst thing ever, that was like I said, the seminal moment in me going on this path. So.
Yeah, and you talked about like everything that you learned about baseball ended up being wrong, and This is you have a data driven facility. It's like baseball is finally coming to the 21st century. And when
Yeah.
I think like data driven, and like as you were talking about it, the only thing that came to mind was Moneyball. you know,
Yeah.
and like how they weren't looking at players like, oh, he's got a good arm, he's got the look. They were looking at, what's his productivity? How does he play? And how could this person play in this position or in that position? And it's really awesome to see that really just be what baseball is nowadays, like this new age of baseball and where it's going.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of dovetail back to what we were talking about earlier with the Wild things, what it did to the game was it made baseball executives and management better able to assess what they have, and so therefore they didn't have to have these huge farm systems. They can kind of farm that out to indie ball, and then kind of take what they think they have based on the data they're able to grab from these guys, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
What they're able to assess from TrackMan or Hawkeye or anything that most of these clubs have now. So
Yeah, absolutely. Now I want to ask you, with all this data, what do you do with it? Like me, I'm a guy, I'm not a math guy. I'm not, like, when I think numbers, I get scared. I'm like, I don't want to look at it.
yeah,
So how do you use these numbers to assess how to help a player?
that's a great question. And that is, I think, what separates some facilities from others. Now, when we first started doing this, there was nobody within 1,000 miles doing what we were doing. So there was a lot of pushback on it, and there still is to this day. Yeah. But to answer your question specifically, having an understanding of what those numbers mean helps us explain to a player, hey, this isn't just me saying, oh, you're cutting the ball. This is me being able to say, your spin efficiency is 70%. You're cutting the ball. If it's not 95, you're losing velocity and some control too. So having that extra piece of, I guess, unbiased, extra piece, having an unbiased eye that is technology, it really helps buy-in from the athletes who otherwise might be skeptical, because it's not just my opinion. It is what it is. Like, let's say you have a negative attack angle. I don't want to throw too many crazy stuff at you because I don't want your listeners to fall asleep. But a negative attack angle would typically mean you're pushing the bat down. And we know, based on all the data that's been collected in the last, 5 to 10 years, that a positive attack angle, a positive attack angle is where most of the best hitters live. There are some that are in between 8 and 12, and there's some that are between 10 and 18, but none of them are -4. So if you have a -4 attack angle, then that tells us that you're dropping into the ball, and it's going to make the opportunities to hit a lot harder. We want a large window to hit with, not a very small one, and we don't want to have to be perfect all the time, which most of those kids do. Now they get away with it at the lower levels because, frankly, the pitching isn't very good in high school and youth leagues or even travel leagues. But once you get to some of the pitchers that come through here, you can't hit with some of the things that some of the things players do that the technology helps us identify and show them. So that's one small example of how tech can be an aid. It gets more difficult and tricky when we're talking about something called pitch design that's very popular now and probably will become more popular with less sticky stuff available to professional pitchers. But trying to shape a pitch to do what you want it to do is completely new, and that's born from things like Rapsodo, which is a Doppler radar machine, and high-speed cameras that just didn't exist, which is why, and this is another subject for another day, but which is why the sticky stuff has become weaponized. Like now they know they don't have to guess what it's doing to the ball, and it makes it really, really hard to hit. So again, without those machines, it just becomes, I don't want to say a guessing game, but it's definitely one person's eye versus physics. And so, they're usually going to side with math, because math doesn't care who you are, or how much money you have, or whose dad you are, or anything like that. It's very black and white, and that's the world we live in here. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sticky stuff, and I mentioned the article earlier with Travis Sawchik from The Score. like you kind of just hit on it, but like the weaponizing of it, and like how, like I don't know if you know, but how did this even come into the game? Like obviously we've had rosin and sunscreen forever, but
Yeah.
the use of this spider tech and all these other foreign substances, where did this, do you even know where it came from?
The honest answer is no. But I became aware of it when Travis approached me for this piece. He said, "Listen, you're the only place within 300 miles of me besides PNC Park that has the stuff I need to do this test." And I said, "Okay." And he had been following me for a while, and that's the world he covers pretty much.
Yeah.
What I do is the world he covers. Only he covers the best in the world. I'm just this guy in Pittsburgh. But so he came in, and but like anybody who's going to do something like this, I tried to be a little prepared. So I went out and asked a lot of my professional pitchers, and I have about 23 that I work with. And I said, "All right, guys, what's going on with this stuff? What is it? You know, how does it work?" And I was blown away with how extensive their responses were. I'm not gonna name any names, but I was blown away with how widespread it was.
Mhm.
I had read the things that some people suggested, like the 60 to 70% of pitchers used it, and I was kind of like, yeah. All right. But after watching what I watched and hearing from the athletes that I spoke to, I believe it. But I think once pitchers knew that spin meant more swing and miss or more movement, I think it was an easy jump to make. Like if I'm going to put more spin on the ball and it's going to cause more swings and misses, I'm going to be more attractive and my salary is probably going to go up. So
Yeah.
I think it was an easy leap. And you're talking about a sport that, for a time had a lot of people putting things into their body to help them perform better. Putting something onto their body probably wasn't a bridge too far for these guys who grew up in that environment. And I think you're really seeing the effects of what that had with some of these pitchers and how their performance has really fallen off a cliff since that article came out. I credit Travis for that. Some people tease me on Twitter about it, like, when did this all start? And people blame me, but it was Travis's idea to write the article, not mine. So
You're the scapegoat in all this.
Yeah.
Now, touching on this, and I want to talk about what happened with Tyler Glasnow and how he said not using sunscreen and rosin, he feels like that affected his arm and could have been the cause of his injury. I want to know what your thought is on that, because your son wasn't using any of this, and he still got injured. So what do you see in a comparison there?
I just don't have any data to support that that's going to cause an arm injury. They could very well be true, but I don't have any knowledge or reason to believe that caused it. Is he upset by it? Probably, as he was a high spin rate guy. And like if you have, like, high spin rate isn't for everybody, but it's exactly for people like Garrett Cole and Tyler Glasnow. Somebody like Kurt Schilling that throws a very heavy fastball, which means it doesn't spin a whole lot, so gravity really pulls on it. That's different. But Tyler Glasnow was a top of the zone fastball guy and a hammer curveball guy, both ripe for high spin. So I'm sure he's just not thrilled about not being able to use it. And then I guess when he got injured, maybe that frustration boiled into his answer. That's me guessing, but I don't have anything that says, and I haven't read anything that says that not being able to grip the ball the way you want to is going to lead to a TJ or Laban or anything like that. So again, I'm not sure that he's wrong, but I don't know that he's right about that either. So
yeah. Well, we've talked about the elephant in the room with pitching and all that. I feel like this was a great conversation about it. But before we get out of here, I want to ask you, say you see this kid, he's playing maybe little league, early pony league, and you see a lot of potential in him, but he has, like, either it's his father or someone in his family is like, oh, he's got to keep it old school. What are you going to tell them to convince them to come to your facility and say, listen, if you go by the numbers, I can make him better than what he is or what he's going to be without it? What's your pitch to that parent to convince them to have their son or even daughter come to your facility?
that's a great question. It's a little complicated. And I always start off by telling everybody that comes to me that I am the world's worst salesman. I'm just horrible at it. And usually when I kind of come out with that, that kind of disarms them. And then I just tell them the truth. And I'll give you an example. A guy that I went to Duquesne with, Eddie Click, was a fantastic pitcher, the Deuce. And he's been kind of keeping his eye on a big fella up in Newcastle named Rocco Bernardina since he was about 10 years old. So when we parted ways 20 years ago, Eddie was exceptional baseball mind, and I'm a nobody. And so when Rocco approached him about coming here, you know, their families are close, and Eddie was like, well, you know, let me see about this. And so Eddie came in with a skeptical eye, and but when he saw, you know, the quantifiable things that we could show the athlete or the parent who's engaged in the way that you were talking about, Eddie knew right away that this would be something that this young man should do, because it's not that we're just promising, you know, velocity or anything like that. I think that's the misconception. What we do is, numbers aren't all about performance. Numbers can also be about recovery and being able to stay healthy, not just throw harder. So using that stuff and being able to hook up Rocco or really anybody to things like Modus, which measures arm stress, is a way to say, okay, this is the way he throws now. These are his stress levels. We'd like to get him here. This is what we've done for other guys built like him. Here's where they are now. And the goal is always to be, let's throw harder with less stress on the arm. Now, injuries are always part of the game. It's the most dangerous thing you can do for your elbow and shoulder to throw a baseball 90 miles an hour. But there are things you can do to mitigate that. And the tech that we have, and we've learned about, and we've used for longer than anybody around here, allows us to really give athletes their, you know, a really good shot at understanding, you know, what their, you know, arm stress should be, what kind of bandwidth is acceptable, when is it too much, when do we need to back off. And some of that tech is sophisticated, like Modus, and some of it is very old school, like a stopwatch or a radar gun. If you see a precipitous drop off in velocity, that's a red flag that something is potentially going wrong and needs to be corrected, or else, you know, you get into an injury. We've seen that too. But that would probably be my pitch. And again, I'm not good at pitches. I just kind of show, no pun intended. I just show them, you know, where they are now, what I'd like to do for them, teach them to throw on a schedule. Most of these players need to be kind of, I don't want to say deprogrammed, but they need to kind of get out of the travel ball mindset of throwing every weekend, doing nothing for 5 days and throwing again. And then we get into, you know, using tech to help them understand what their body's doing, where it can go, and to kind of monitor that journey. You know, and it really is a journey. There's no fairy dust here. These kids work their tails off, and you know, the tech helps us do that. And if parents are still not sold after that, then they probably get tired of seeing our pitchers blow away guys in playoffs and when it matters on Sundays. So that would be my sales pitch.
There it
when
is.
everybody around,
perfect.
Yeah. So when everybody around you works as hard as they do, it makes you want to work harder. So the culture here is probably the most special part about what we have. And that goes back to some of the old guys we had that weren't great athletes. Guys like Luke Cahey, who played club ball at West Virginia, or, you know, Jeffrey Wormbine, who's trying to walk on at IUP, or Cameron Knox, who's at Fordham. But like, these are guys that took a chance on this place, or Sean Keeley's another one. And it was really all about understanding what they're capable of through tech, and it still requires an immense amount of work. And those guys really set the table for what would become, you know, obviously we have a lot of great athletes now, but it wasn't always the case. And so, you know, I'm always blown away by, you know, when old guys come back and they see what this has become, because we didn't have 6'8" monsters walking that door back then, and now it's like we have a lot of them. So it's kind of funny to see.
All right, Matt. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and educating me on the new age of pitching and baseball in general. Before you leave, just tell everybody how they can get a hold of you and how they can come train with you.
Yeah, so pvsbaseball.com is the best place to find us. We're on Twitter at pvsbaseball and Instagram. If you want to train with us, you have to know somebody here or a college coach. We are 100% referral based. You cannot buy your way in. We're very protective of the group in here, and everybody in here is training with somebody they want to train with next to them. So that's how you get in touch with us. We can be found there. And I really want to thank you for not only doing this interview with me and highlighting a small business, but all the work you did with those minor leaguers. It means a lot to me. I say this a lot. I never say anybody stinks. You hear that a lot at a ball game. Like, oh, this player stinks. And if you know how hard these guys work that never get a chance, you'll never say that again. So you taking the time to interview those minor leaguers, Sansone, Kitch, and Meeker, I love that guy, and of course Joey Campagna and others, Tommy. Highlighting their journeys and is just, I think, the best way to grow what they're trying to do, which is the game of baseball. Growing the game through efforts like yourself and other people to cover. It's easy to cover the Pirates, easy to cover the Cardinals or the Reds, but I think that it's my favorite part of baseball is the minor leagues and college baseball. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. That was awesome, and I enjoyed those, and I'm sure a lot of other people did too. So thank you.
Hey, it's my pleasure. And when I was talking to the GM of the Wild Things about what I wanted to do, we had like the same vision of, these guys are Western PA born and bred. And once they got out of high school, it was like nobody cared about them. So now it's like, why not bring the spotlight back to these guys who have worked their tails off, and now they're playing for a hometown team. So that was my goal, and that was the vision that the GM of the Wild Things had, and that's all I tried to do, is give these guys their due. So I want to thank you again for coming on. I'll put all the links to your social media and to your website into the description of the video. And I want to thank you again, Matt Pilewski.
All right.
Again for coming
on.
On.
Thank you.